how do you market yourself as, in the business that I'm in? And really thought
Yep.
leadership is the only way you can market yourself, because your clients aren't finding you through Google ads. You know what I mean? So they are finding you because you are demonstrably valuable out in the world, right? So basically it
Yeah.
means being loud and proud out in the world with your thought leadership and constantly focusing on how you're publishing and how you're getting your footprint out there as a thought leader, because that's the way you're going to get referrals, and it's the way that you're going to get inbound interest from companies who are interested in hiring you.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Grow It podcast. One of your hosts here, Trey King. And today we are very excited to have our guest, Mr. Robert Rose from Seventh Bear. As you guys know, this is the podcast is where the leaders come on to come talk about their niche expertise. So today we'll be diving into his story a bit as well as what his company does. So make sure to stick around for this one. But without further ado, Robert, welcome. Thanks for hopping on today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, and it's always fun to talk about this stuff.
Awesome. Robert, if we can kick things off, if you could kindly just give us a bit of an introduction and just a bit of your background as well, please.
Sure, sure. Well, I've got the gray hair to show it, but I've basically been in marketing for about 35 years now,
Oh, wow.
which is, yeah, it's a long time. Started back in the mid 90s in the television industry. And sort of that's where I cut my teeth, as it were, in marketing, and then went through the dot-com boom as I worked in agencies and consulting firms, and then also worked a little client side on various elements. I've been a consultant for most of my career, and then ended up as CMO of a startup company here in Southern California,
Yeah.
um, in the B2B space, and was there for about 8 years, typical 2 rounds of funding, Silicon Valley, yada, yada, and did all of that and grew the business. And then I met this guy, Joe Polizzi, who we became friends in about 2008. And
Yeah.
he was talking about this thing called content marketing. And I realized it was how I had grown the startup that I worked for. I had basically done a weird thing when they plopped a bunch of money on my desk and said, build marketing, do that marketing thing. And I'd hired journalists and designers and writers and media people because I knew it from my television background, and
Yeah.
basically created a little, publishing shop. And it had worked. And so I told him my story. He told me his story, and he ended up forming this thing called the Content Marketing Institute, which was growing. And I joined as chief strategy officer with him. And it was there that I built another consulting practice there to work with clients on their content marketing operations and strategy and all the things that were happening in the 2010s.
Right.
And then 2016, basically the company was sold to
Yeah.
Informa, a very giant UK company. Joe rode off into the sunset and now writes novels and vacations for a living. And I
Yeah.
still
Tough
work.
life.
I'm a working Joe, and I have spent the last few years really working as a consultant, building my consulting firm. And then just recently, literally in the last 6 months, I have pivoted my consulting firm again to really broaden out my fractional services and broader marketing services, and sort of go back to my roots, which is sort
Mm.
of as a marketing strategist, and have been working with small and medium sized companies to really help them basically tell their story a little better and differentiate in a crowded world.
Awesome. That is great. Thanks for a bit
Sure.
about
And
that
along the
background.
way, I've written a couple of books and host a podcast and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, those little things, just popped out a book here, and
Yeah.
no, I saw you. I saw that you're a busy guy. Tell me, what would you see as like the most significant value that your firm can bring to other businesses? You know, what would you say is that value?
The the value that we provide, I mean, we say it, maybe it's a little too cute, is modern marketing guidance, right? Which is, in today's world, as I like to say, marketing is, and I've truly have believed this for the last 35 years. Marketing is not that hard to understand. There's just a lot of it to understand. And it's as I call it, a very broad, shallow ocean, right? It's not terribly deep, but it is big, and there's a lot to keep track of, and a lot to, especially in modern marketing, with the best practices and those sorts of things. And many businesses are just so focused on their own growth, their own issues, their own challenges, but they don't have the time, nor do they have the inclination, quite frankly, to keep up with all of the changes that are going on in modern marketing. And so, one of the things and values that we bring most is the ability to look at what companies are doing and basically just help their teams get better at it. And
Right.
that's really, we look at it as our sort of focus. We're not an agency in the sense that we're not, we do have fractional services, but we're not ultimately there to do it for you. We're there to help you do it better. Um,
Right.
so a lot of what we do is training, a lot of what we do is education through consulting, and a lot of what we do is building in capabilities that ultimately, as we like to say, we teach people how to fish, right? And so it's that idea, and we think that's and at least I think this is important in 2025, where investment in people, investment in the teams, is incredibly important because we've gotten so wrapped around the axle of technology and automation that we often cede creativity and the human
Yeah.
experience in many businesses. And I think it's just ever important we get that back.
Right. Gotcha. Gotcha. So, would you please share like a success story that you've had with one of your clients? Since you guys came in and they were at this X certain point, and then they got to a new, like some good growth after you guys jumped in with them. If you don't mind to share, you don't have to obviously say the name of the company. Don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but just an example, please.
I'll tell you one. It's a nonprofit organization that I have just literally concluded my work with
Yeah.
over the last 12 months, and it was the almost the perfect engagement for what it is we do, because the challenge they were having was that it's a nonprofit in the publishing space. And for years, they'd had a print magazine, they'd had a direct mail program, they got most of their donations through older people who got a letter in the mail and would support the organization in that way. And they were going through a digital transformation and having a bit of a tough time doing that. And
Right.
so they had a new app that they had in the App Store. They had their website, of course, they had their email programs, and they were really trying to figure out how to operationalize and integrate the new digital operation with what they were doing classically. And so it
Right.
was a lot of working with them on figuring out the operational sides of things, right? So figuring out how people collaborate and work together in a new way. It was
Yeah.
also helping them figure out their new brand in a digital age and sort of working with them to create a new digital presence for their brand and sort of, try and become cool again to the younger crowd, right? To the digital crowd, as they sort of balance this idea of making sure they were still relevant to their existing audience. And so they weren't going to kill the print magazine, they weren't going to kill the direct mail business. But how do you balance those things together? And ultimately, it was about bringing on new talent
Mm.
to their team to basically head up things like content, which was a function they didn't really have in the business prior to this, bringing on new talent as it pertained to digital data and analytics, and really working with them to round out their team as well as their sort of digital strategy over the course of 12 months. And ostensibly by bringing on the new talent and imbuing the team with the education and the sort of ideas that we would bring to the table, it really enabled them to sort of take off on their own. And so that engagement for us is winding down at the moment because they've got all the people now and the capabilities now to take all this on their own. And they're in a spot now where they can scale their efforts and do all the things that they want to do, in the future. And I've sort of, my goal was to work myself out of a job, and we successfully did that over 12 months.
Yes, that is awesome. What a story. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, kudos. That's excellent. Um, Talking about working for yourself, tell me, obviously building a business, is not always a smooth road, and there's some challenges along the way, right?
You think a few?
That's the diplomatic voice right there. Challenges along the
Yeah.
way. So, having said that, do you mind sharing maybe one or two things that challenges that you are facing growing the business, and things that you do to overcome something like that, to break through maybe a glass ceiling or
I'll speak to two. Um,
right?
The first is something. It, it was the reason that I decided to pivot my little company in the at the end of last year and really start anew. I literally did our little press release to whatever extent that was, and sort of posted it up on social and launched the new website quite literally on January 3rd, right, which was the Monday, right? So it was begin the new year with a new flag that we're flying.
Right.
Same basic services that we had been providing for the last 7 years, but so why do that? Well,
Mm.
in and many anybody out there who is working in the idea of marketing consulting, marketing technology, et cetera, knows that the last 2 years, 23 and 24, so I call it the 24-month long year, right? It was just an awful year for those of
Yeah.
us in consulting and agencies. And so much of it has to do with the way that larger agencies, big consulting firms and larger agencies pivoted and came downstream, and really started to compete with the boutiques and the single practitioners out there.
Right.
Additionally, you had upper pressure of the individual, people that were laid off in the tech industry, all becoming all of a sudden, fractional CMOs. So you could literally throw a rock and hit a marketing consultant in
Yeah.
23 and 24. And so that pressure to reinvent ourselves was really high, really, really high. And so finding that differentiation in that sea of noise was probably the biggest challenge I've ever faced as a business entrepreneur, which was how do you differentiate marketing consulting in 2025 when you've got smaller companies than yourself or smaller practitioners than yourself here, and you've got big giant companies there, and you've got to sort of carve out this. We've got tons of experience, but we're also new and innovative, right? And so that idea was incredibly challenging and one of the hardest things that I've ever done, to be quite honest. The second thing is that in that the business model changed in
Right.
that it really went from, and my story there with the nonprofit is a great example of 12 months of retained service. So 90% of our business and my business, even call it, 8 months ago, a year ago, was project based, right? It was, they would hire us for a project, we would come in and we would do the project and we would be done. And so managing, learning how, literally me learning how to cadence out my, because normally when you do a project as a consultant, you want to go as fast as you possibly can, right? Because the faster you do the project, the quicker you get to the end of the project and you get to bill somebody, right?
Yeah.
And you're done and you're ready for the next project. And so, but when you're working as a fractional person or you're working on a retained basis, you work at the cadence of your client. And so, even though you might know the answer,
Yeah.
right,
Or can,
tomorrow,
or can
you
shorten the
need
sales cycle.
time to build that answer into the team. And so you have to work much at a much different cadence and a much different idea. And so that certainly affects the way that you do your job, but it also affects the billing and the cash flow and all the things, all the things that you don't want to do as a business owner. It also
Yeah.
affects all of that too. So those two things together were the biggest challenges that I've had over the last 10 years.
That is very interesting. I find as well when it comes, especially when it comes to from a fractional point of view, where they like you just rightfully said. I mean, you've got your, let's call it 30-day, 30, 60, 90-day plan in the beginning, for example, on how to change things and have the right conversations in management with that specific company. But a lot of the times the client, just the way they are set up, and sometimes they set up for that, like for the last 40 years, the way that they do things, like you mentioned, the cadence, right? And because of that, it gets frustrating when it comes to what plan you want to implement and the pace that they are willing to work at, or changes that they are willing to make, to make sure that there's more sales or whatever the case may be. And that's one thing that I found with specifically with one or two of our clients. So I fully get that. Tell me, the are you currently, like, because you've like you said, you've been doing this for over 30 years. Or do you work on things like to grow your company, like thought leadership and things like that? Is that something that's important for you in your industry?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, it's from two aspects to it, right? One is how do you market yourself as, in the business that I'm in, and really thought
Yeah.
leadership is the only way you can market yourself, because
Yeah.
your clients aren't finding you through Google ads. You know what I mean? So they are finding you because you are demonstrably valuable out in the world, right? So basically it
Yeah.
means being loud and proud out in the world with your thought leadership, and constantly focusing on how you're publishing and how you're getting your footprint out there as a thought leader, because that's the way you're going to get referrals, and it's the way that you're going to get inbound interest from companies who are interested in hiring you. The second thing is that I would say is that it's become an incredibly important aspect of my clients' marketing, right? So um, I'm very lucky in the sense that I've been focused on that idea for literally 12 of the last, of the last years, and focused on how to build thought leadership programs and content programs, engagement programs. I primarily work in B2B, but
Right.
we have a few B2C clients, but so it's a lot about thought leadership. B2C isn't typically about thought leadership. It's much more around engagement, entertainment, and making people laugh and
Yeah.
making people cry. Whereas B2B is much more around, expertise and thought leadership and vision sort of for the future ideas. I tend to lean more there, just not necessarily by design, but just by the way that my clients, and sort of it's a bit of a machine at this point in terms of feeding on itself. And so, yeah, thought leadership is incredibly important in what we do, but it's incredibly important in marketing, full stop.
Right. Right. Tell me, and then I would like to hear your opinion if you can give like a golden nugget or two. You know how to not just your own company, your own firm, but other firms as well. You know what to do to grow companies, right? That's what you specialize in. Maybe one or two, if you're willing to share. What mindset would you say do you need to have to be a successful founder, CEO, leader of a company? What mindset we're talking about?
Well, I'll tee this up by saying I don't know that, here's something that is it was an interesting self-awareness for me. And
Right?
and maybe this is the nugget itself, right? It's very meta in this particular way,
Yeah.
which is I don't consider myself terribly visionary, right?
Mm.
I consider myself much more of a what I would call a map maker. In other
Right?
words, given a vision, I can draw a map. That's what I'm really good at. I recognize that in myself, that I don't usually set destinations, even for myself. But what I'm really good at is mapping a destination, right? Give me a destination and I can help you get there.
Right?
And so, in that particular sense, I think maybe the nugget is, if you're the CEO or an entrepreneur, one thing you have to ask yourself is, what is it that you're really good at? Like, what is it? And be self-aware enough to say, to understand where you're not, right? Where you're not necessarily the best person in the room to
Mm.
solve a particular problem. And where I'm really good is helping set maps and helping set direction, but I'm neither good in sort of the visionary, like, oh, what should our brand be? Like in sort of thinking about the big North Star idea. I can help, I can brainstorm, but that's not the way I'm wired. I'm a
Right?
creative guy, but I'm definitely not wired that way. I'm much more wired to say, oh, you want to go here, this North, I love that. Let me build you a map to get there. Nor am I particularly good at managing, the automobile that's going to get us on that path, right? The really tactical, granular things like, SEO and, Google buying ad, media strategies, and, all those the more sort of tactical elements. I'm not terribly good there either. I rely on a lot of other expertise for that capability. So I
Right?
think the biggest nugget is having that self-awareness
Mm.
to not only create and understand where you need help, but more importantly, when you start creating content, when you start creating thought leadership, or when you start putting yourself out there in the world as sort of a leader that people want to trust, is pulling into that sweet spot, right? What the thing you're passionate about doing, and knowing your own self-awareness and where you fit into that world, to make sure that you're marketing. My biggest piece of advice to all entrepreneurs is market where you want to go, not where you are, right?
Right?
So
It's a, I'll say,
one of my closest friends, who is now an extraordinarily successful innovation strategist,
right.
and in the early days, she was, she wrote email copy, right? She was writing email copy and doing SEO work for brands. And when she decided to set up her own shingle, she could have very easily set it up, her little website, and said basically, "Hey, I write email copy, I'm great at SEO, and I'm great at all these tactical things." But she wanted to be that innovation strategist. So she just basically said, "Look, I'll get the gigs with email copywriting and writing ebooks and doing SEO. I'll get those gigs through my network and through what I'm doing from a direct marketing basis. But I want, when people see me, I want them to
Mm,
see the innovation strategist, because that's where I'm going."
right.
And so that's where all of her content stayed, to take the time and the marathon that it is to actually get to that. And pretty soon she started getting one project, then two projects, then three, and she fully evolved into where she wanted to go with her innovation strategist status, without having to sort of figure out how to evolve there with her current
Yeah.
clients and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Definitely it does. Um, Tell me, and then just lastly from my side, where can the listeners, where can they get hold of you guys?
What was the question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Sorry, just for the listeners, where can they get hold of you guys?
Ah, easy enough. I'm on LinkedIn. It was really the only social network that I'm very active on.
Active, right?
Um, and so, I mean, I'm a search away on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with people there. And then, of course, our website is seventhbear.com.
Excellent. Well, Robert, I need to thank you for coming on and willing to share your expertise and give some good advice as well. I can fully understand why your firm's doing so well. May you just grow from strength to strength. And I had such a good time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.